Welcome to the Urban EV Podcast. So many cars, yet so few plugs. We speak to industry leaders and EV owners with boots on the ground to read the tea leaves on the direction of the green energy revolution. I'm your host, Rob Hoffman.
And I'm Scott Murphy.
Today, we're joined by Cecile Post, Global Director of Sales at ChargeTrip, a leading smart EV routing platform. Cecile brings a wealth of experience in e-mobility, having held pivotal roles at EV Box and serving as a founding board member of the OSPI protocol. Cecile, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me.
All right, so talk to us a little more about ChargeTrip and your role over there.
Yeah, that's a good question. So ChargeTrip is, I would like to say, one of the leading EV routing engines in Europe and US. And my role is that I'm responsible on the commercial side. So I'm sitting a lot with clients and industry leaders to figure out what's going on in the market and how we can help them best.
So talk to us a little more about ChargeTrip's mission and why it matters.
Our mission is getting as many people in an electric car. And why that matters is that if we look at road transportation today, 75% of all transport related emissions are still coming from road transport. And passengers cars account for 40% of that. We want to meet the 2050 net zero goals. And if we look at the results over to get there, the EV adoption must grow by 12%. And one of the main reasons why people maybe are scared away by that is that range anxiety is still a barrier, right? And when I talk with any EV driver out there, I think there's no day that it's the same to drive an electric car. When it's sunny out there, you can have a much longer range than you're driving the same vehicle in the winter. And that's where we come in, and that's where we help our customers get their drivers from A to B in the right manner and figure out when and where they need to charge.
Okay, so you're working with the charger manufacturers. What are you doing to basically enhance their goals and their reliability? How does ChargeTrip fit in?
In Europe, there are approximately 2,400 different CPOs. In US, there are around 70. That's precisely what makes it complex. If you show up at a charging station, it's not always the case that you can charge there, right? It's like a combination of you showing up at a charging station, having some kind of charging card that needs to be accepted by the charging station. That's precisely you just introduced on the OSPI protocol. For example, Shell Recharge, that is a customer of ours, they have a routing engine to let you know where their card is actually accepted by ChargeTrip.
The OCPI protocol that you're founding board member of, that is that fully embraced in Europe right now, and how is it looking in the United States?
Yeah, I think the market went through quite a big change over the last 5 years in terms of maturity, which is really good. When I joined in my first week at EV Box, which must have been 6, 7 years ago, I got the invite to sit together with all industry parties of all other CPOs so we can discuss how we send each other invoices at the end of the month for the transactions we did. Today, that OSPI protocol is fully standardized. A lot of parties are using it, both in Europe and the US, and you also see that APAC is picking up on that.
So we've got protocol issues, and then
Yeah.
we've got actually downtime charger issues as well, right? The reliability, the user experience there. Can you explain to me just a little more on a granular level, how specifically are you helping the CPOs with their uptime and reliability issues?
I want to take this on across two different continents. So let's take Scott. I know Scott is based out of Europe. If Scott gets into his car today, he has one charging card or maybe multiple. And if he drives down from Valencia to Barcelona, he comes across 100 different CPOs. But this charge card that he has is not accepted across all those 100 CPOs. So what we do is we give Scott the tool if he drives down from Valencia to Barcelona with, for example, a Shell or a Repsol card. We give you the tool and a route planner to define when and where you need to charge. And on one hand, we do that based on the vehicle that you're driving. So we know how your car is consuming energy. And because we know how much energy you're going to consume from Valencia to Barcelona, we can then help you select the right charging stations during that trip. Another really crucial element in Europe is that there's such a big price deviation. So I'm pretty sure you're more happier when you arrive in Barcelona and you paid 80 euros for your trip instead of 300. So that's another
Yeah.
big factor that we help defining. And then if we put that over on the US side, Rob, like you just mentioned, I think the US is seeing a lot of issues on the reliability side. There are a lot of stations
Yeah.
that are broken. There's less awareness on uptime today. So what we help do there, or if you would use our services in the US, like for example, Flow Energy, that's a charge card provider, but also a public charging operator in the US. If you would use their route planner, we would also help you filter out which stations have been online in the last 24 hours. And therefore, the likelihood that you arrive at a station that works will go up drastically.
So, what do you think in terms of what a customer sees? How does ChargeTrip impact their ability to have a smoother or more reliable journey?
The early adapter was completely fine with spending a few hours planning a trip and figuring out which charger you needed to stop at. My mom doesn't want to
Not
do
the
that.
mainstream, not the mainstream adopters. No, they are
No.
not interested in that.
So that's where we come in. And what we help our, like, we only support B2B clients like CPOs and EMSPs. They indeed embed our software in their front end, so in their customer facing apps. And that's where we come in.
ChargeTrip is not a standalone app, right? You're a
Yeah.
B2B model, correct? You're working with the other CPOs to enhance their route planning, or how does
Yeah.
it specifically work?
Yeah, so how I always like to explain ChargeTrip in the most simplistic way is that we're an engine that can predict for any electric vehicle on any route how much energy it's going to consume. And there are three use cases that we support. One we already touched upon, that's route planning. So how do we get from A to B? And our B2B customers can apply business logic. We have simulation tools that are used by consultancy firms like Deloitte to run very big simulations on how fleets should electrify, because the reality is not everything is ready to be electrified today. That's a transition period. And then the third thing is that we are embedded into dispatching systems to help fleet managers in their operation and get an understanding on each and every vehicle, how much battery they need to perform their trip on a specific shift.
And I assume you're leaning heavily into AI.
I would say we rely very heavily on great developers that we have as well. We calculate, like, I think today we route through our B2B solutions approximately 20% of the EV drivers in Europe. So
Mhm.
that's, with that comes a massive amount of routes every month. There's definitely self-learning involved on that. I'm not a developer myself, and in all honesty, I think without our great developers, the products will not stand.
I think one of the things that was interesting to me was all the different data points that you kind of compile about the vehicle, about the journey itself, maybe even the weather. Can you talk more about kind of how you're predicting how much energy I might need in a very specific situation? So, like Rob recently went on a road trip and kind of got into a pickle in terms of getting to a charger in the right amount of time. He was going to have to go back and then forward. I don't know, Rob,
Well,
maybe
this
give a
the
kind of a low
yeah,
net and
I'll just summarize what Scott's talking about. Yeah, so, well, I was going into an area where the charges were far and few between. The charger at my destination, it was not communicating, so I could not tell the status of it, which is a common problem. So I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, whatever. If there's a wait, there's a wait. So be it. It's okay. There's some amenities nearby." No, as it turns out, it was completely down. And I had two options. One was to go backwards half an hour to charge up or to continue going my direction. And that would have been 45 minutes away, but it was like at the tail end of my range. And I literally had to drive at 45 miles an hour with the heat off. My wife was not a happy camper. No one was happy in this car. This did not help me sell the concept of EV driving to her or my kids. So, yes, if you can help people avoid those situations, I think this is one of the hugest black eyes that EV travel today is facing, is the range anxiety, which is
Rob,
legit.
I feel bad for you, and I, on the other hand, would have loved to be a fly on the wall in this car. Uh, Probably you didn't need heating because it was
There were
pretty
some interesting
cold.
conversations taking this
It's,
podcast.
but you're not the only one. That's the first thing I can echo. So what, and Scott, coming back to your question, what we do with our engine is precisely this, helping solving this problem. How it works is that on one hand, we build a vehicle database that helps us define if Rob gets into his car. And Rob, I'm not sure what car you drive, but you would select the vehicle that you drive. And because you selected the vehicle that you drive, we know how that vehicle is going to consume energy at that specific moment that you calculate your trip. We help you define what the situation looks like that specific day. And then if you do that with your payment provider, we will also help you select the stations that are compatible with your EMSP or payment provider. So you show up at stations that are actually working for you. And then on top of that, like I mentioned, you can select the amenities that you want to see on that stop. Hopefully, you can even enjoy the charging stop and make your ride happy again.
And I know there's a lot less operators over here than there are in Europe. And yeah, it's a bit of a pain. All right, this one I need my credit card for. This one I need an app, and I've connected this to my credit card. There's friction there, but
Yeah.
there is, for me, the biggest primary holdups are, can I rely on this charger to be up when I arrive? Whatever route planning software I'm using, because you have competitors out there and they'll say, all right, this makes about sense. You're going to stop about here and you're going to charge for X amount of time. And I'm sure if I use similar apps, I'd come up with similar solutions. But I don't know if I can trust that charger to be online. And the fact that they don't always seem to communicate with all the apps, I know this has got to be complicated. Do you have any secret sauce that's maybe a little better than some of your competitors in communicating with the apps, communicating with the chargers, and giving me a general idea of whether that charger is going to be online or offline?
Yeah, it all comes down to the data that you receive from the CPO, right? The charge point operator. If they do a great job, they will feed you new data on if the station is online or offline, in use or free, on an interval basis of, for example, 5 minutes. But that's not the case in each and every CPO. I think the European market is a little bit more open to sharing a lot of that information, whilst we see a little bit more reluctant on the US side. What we indeed add upon that to make it a better experience is we apply our own rules to figure out if the station has been indeed used in the recent time period, so we can at least define. Another thing that we do is we allow our B2B clients to collect reviews on stations, and that also has an impact on selecting the station that you want to use. So really low ranked stations will just appear lower in the selection.
Outside of infrastructure, what do you see as some of the kind of roadblocks to adoption, and what do you think that everyone in the industry can do to kind of help tear down those roadblocks?
There's so much up in the air in the US right now, right? There's so much changing, there's so much uncertainty. But let's not get into that. I think what is most important is that we keep the end goal in mind, and that is that we need to start consuming more renewable energy. And to do that, there needs to be more EVs on the road. The charging networks need to roll out more infrastructure still today. There are some areas where, like the one where Rob is based, where you only have one station every hour. I think that's just not really helping the whole situation of adoption. Um, and another thing is, I think it's great that there starts getting regulations in place that the hardware needs to have a specific kind of uptime. That should be really helping the industry as well. If I have chats with people that don't drive an electric car, they're like, I'm just afraid of driving it because there's so much unknown.
Yep.
And I think one really great example of a client that I work with is a big rental company in Europe, and they try to get people into EVs. And I think for me, that's the most interesting use case, because you go on holidays, you get out of the plane, you're already driving in a country that you have no clue what is going to happen, which for some people can already be the thing itself, right? But then you ask people that don't drive an EV to maybe get into an electric car. Yeah, I think that's if you succeed in that, that's a really cool thing to do. And one of the things that we do with them is we have a range spider. So what you can do, or what you see on the counter is, oh, I'm considering getting this electric vehicle. Can I see how far I can drive on the battery it has today? And then it
Mm.
already, like, just the visual of seeing that you can drive for hours just takes away so much of the stress and shows them that they can just perfectly drive to their holiday that they booked and have a really fun time driving an electric car.
Just out of curiosity, not once but twice in the last 3 months have I run into renters at a charger that had no idea how to charge, how anything works. They rented cars, were given
Yeah.
zero instructions, and were completely lost on so many different levels. Once again, a terrible, terrible experience. I know there's a move, Tesla, right? They're the elephant in the room. It's contactless payment. The charger reads your VIN number and it communicates, and everything's connected to the credit card. And that's it. That to me is a very frictionless sort of system. What are
Yeah.
the chances of that, of the Tesla system or something that emulates that, to become mainstream? Do you see that in the future?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because there's a protocol out there that actually does this, right? We refer to it as plug and charge. It means
Mm.
that if the car is plug and charge compatible and the charging stations plug and charge compatible. The moment you show up and connect, it automatically identifies who you are and knows where to send the charging transaction to. The reason that that protocol is around since, I think, 2013 and it doesn't have full adoption yet is the fact that in this industry, so many parties involved. So all the stars need to align. The station needs to be compatible, the vehicle needs to be compatible, the charge card provider needs to be compatible with plug and charge. And if all of them are at the same time available, then the transaction will happen. The likelihood of that happening is so low, and I cannot put a percentage on that, but that's why it is out there. It exists, but it just doesn't have mass adoption yet.
So you're bearish on that. You don't think this is going to happen. This plug and charge is not going to be widespread mainstream solution.
Okay, I don't want to make a claim on that. I don't want to make people upset. I spend a lot of time on it.
And that's what we're here for, is to make you uncomfortable, to make you go out on a limb.
It's around for the last 11 years. How old is the EV?
Yeah,
industry?
yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
15?
That's a strong case you're making here. Yeah, if it hasn't happened yet, is it ever going to happen?
So I
Yeah.
have two questions. What do you think, with your experience in the industry, what would you say is your vision overall for sustainable transportation in the next decade? We'll start with that. And then I want to talk a little bit about ChargeTrip.
I think it's fair to say that we will end up with a mix of energy, like renewable energies on the road, right? Now, in this podcast, we really focus on EV, but there's definitely a case for heavy duty to be on hydrogen, for example. I think there's some really good use cases for renewable energy, like fuels like LNG or CNG. I think the main over the upcoming 10 years, it's just very important that we're realistic on what is the right renewable fuel for the right use case. And to maybe give you an example for that, and it's a little bit controversial on our end, but one of the things we calculate for each and every route is how much CO2 you save by driving that electric car. It takes the energy mix of that country at that specific moment in consideration,
Wow.
but that also results in the fact that sometimes you get a negative.
Yeah.
Because there are situations where it's just not saving CO2 because the energy mix of your charging session is just on fossil fuel. So I'm not
Interesting.
being a realist here.
No. I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. When you think about, again, that same future, do you see there being a tipping point, particularly in the United States, where we cross that kind of greater than 50% adoption rate? Is that going to happen in the next 10 years?
Scott, I hope. And probably if you would have asked me 3 months ago, I would have said, hell yes.
Yeah, fair enough.
What's changed in the last 3 months, Cecile? I don't get it.
It's interesting because I still want to answer with hell yes, but I just have been to a Bloomberg conference earlier this week for 2 days. And I think there we got all the optimists in the room, and then all the math adds up that it still will happen and it's very hard to stop. But I think the reality is that with all the circumstances, it probably will just slow down a little bit. I'm 100% sure it will happen. The adoption rate will just be a little bit slower because people are just waiting now what will happen next.
Yeah.
When you try to get to mass
Yeah.
adoption.
Yeah, it creates a cooling
Yeah, I
effect for
feel like
business,
that's the
when
and then my last question, what's next for ChargeTrip? So obviously you're B2B right now. Anything on the horizon, maybe an app that Rob could have in his pocket?
I don't foresee we get into the B2C space. I don't like.
Fair enough.
I already have a great time working with all the competitors and getting them all on my team. Like I mentioned before, we route now 20% of all EV drivers in Europe. I think that's massive, but it's still not 100%.
It's exciting times right now. Listen, you're at the forefront of all of this, and we really need to say, coming from our perspective, we fully support it. It's what we're all trying to do, is help with the transition, and I think you're an important piece of this puzzle. Yeah, and it remains to be seen how fast this adoption is going to happen, but I think ChargeTrip is going to really help us move things along. All right, Cecile, can you share with our audience where they can find you online or ChargeTrip?
Yeah, you can find us at www.chargetrip.com. Or if you want to test out, you can go at go.chargetrip.com and plan a route yourself.
Awesome. thank you so much for being on the show. It was really great talking with you. Scott, thank you as well. Thank you to the listeners at home. A reminder to follow us on LinkedIn, like, subscribe, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Your review or feedback is always appreciated. Any subject you'd like covered, just leave it in the comments below. We will see you next week with a new episode of the Urban EV Podcast.